Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. India has logged over 323,000 new COVID-19 infections and more than 2,700 deaths in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, 142 people have died from the virus and over 4,400 tested positive overnight. Meanwhile, the EU says it will start sharing up to 60 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine with other countries in coming weeks. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.1 million lives and infected over 147 million people. In Myanmar, heavy fighting has erupted after an armed militia captured a military base near the Thai border. A spokesperson for the Karen National Union said the camp had been burned down. This comes as the junta said it will positively consider ASEAN's suggestions on ending the turmoil. Russia says the US and NATO actions in Europe are contributing to an increased military threat. Russian media quoted Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu as saying that Moscow will act as it sees fit to ensure security at its borders. This comes days after Moscow ordered a withdrawal of some troops from its border with Ukraine. The United States has drawn the world's attention towards the raging battle between government and Houthi troops in Yemen's Marib region. In a tweet, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the world must question why the Houthis seek only a military solution. The oil-rich region is the last stronghold of the government in the north, and the rebels have been trying to seize it since February. The talks between Iran and the world powers to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal will resume today in Vienna. In a statement, the EU's political director Enrique Mora said the US possible return to the pact and its implementation will be discussed. Meanwhile, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said the world has no choice but to agree with Iran and lift sanctions. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. India has logged over 323,000 new COVID-19 infections and more than 2,700 deaths in the past 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.1 million lives and infected over 147 million people. More on the pandemic in this report.
With an exponential increase in global cases, inoculation challenges and fears of further economic contraction, the end to the COVID-19 pandemic seems nowhere in sight. India has called on its armed forces to help tackle the devastating crisis. Authorities say oxygen will be released from armed forces reserves, and retired medical personnel will join health facilities that are struggling under the strain of cases. WHO's chief scientist Soumya Swaminathan says the actual number of cases in India is being significantly underreported. Moscow says New Delhi will receive the first batch of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine on May 1st. Australia says it will suspend all direct passenger flights from India until May 15th. Meanwhile, the WHO says millions of children are at risk from other life-threatening diseases, mainly because COVID-19 has severely disrupted their regular immunization process.
The pandemic has caused several disruptions to immunization services around the world. New WHO data shows that as a result of COVID-19, 60 immunization campaigns are currently suspended in 50 countries.
Meanwhile, within a week of lifting a ban on Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, US CDC has warned people getting the shots to watch for blood clot symptoms. However, the US says it will start sharing up to 60 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine with other countries in coming weeks. Canada has announced to send the Army and Red Cross to its worst affected province, Ontario. Meanwhile, amid unprecedented spikes, Turkey has announced a complete nationwide full closure from April 29th until May 17th.
Avrupa'nın açılma sürecine girdiği bir dönemde
we have to bring down the number of our cases below 5,000 at a time when Europe entered a period of easing the restrictions. Otherwise, it will be inevitable for us to face the heavy consequences in every field, from tourism to trade and education.
Thailand has reported 15 deaths, setting a new daily record for the third time in 4 days, despite new shutdowns in Bangkok and other areas.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered 142 fatalities from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll has now risen to 17,329. The ministry reported 4,487 overnight infections. It said nearly 805,000 people contracted the virus so far, out of which almost 700,000 have recovered. The number of active cases has jumped to over 87,000. The ministry said more than 5,000 patients are in critical condition. Moving on now, in Myanmar, heavy fighting has erupted after an armed militia captured a military base near the Thai border. A spokesperson for the Karen National Union said the camp had been burned down. A Thai official in Mai Hong Son province said one person had been wounded during the fighting. This comes as the junta said it will positively consider ASEAN's suggestions on ending the turmoil. Meanwhile, anti-coup activists have resumed protests in Mandalay and Yangon. Activists say security forces have killed more than 750 civilians in the crackdown on the protesters so far. Now, Russia says the actions by the US and the NATO alliance in Europe are contributing to an increased military threat. State media quoted Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu as saying that Moscow will act as it sees fit to ensure security at its borders. Earlier in a phone call, French President Emmanuel Macron urged his Russian counterpart to reduce tensions with Ukraine. In a statement, the Kremlin said Vladimir Putin drew attention to the provocative actions of Kiev. This comes days after Moscow ordered a withdrawal of some troops from its border with Ukraine. Russia says the Open Skies Treaty is on the verge of collapsing. Head of the Russian delegation on arms control, Konstantin Gavrilov, said no unilateral concession should be expected from Russia for the treaty. Gavrilov said the US and its allies blame Russia for the state of the pact as if Washington never withdrew from it. He said Moscow is ready to discuss the concerns of stakeholders, but only after the US returns. The US has withdrawn from the treaty after accusing Moscow of violating the pact and of selective implementation. The agreement establishes a program of unarmed aerial surveillance flights over the territories of the participants. Now, the US has drawn the world's attention towards the raging battle between the government and Houthi troops in Yemen's Marib region. In a tweet, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the world must question why the Houthis seek only a military solution. Blinken held a meeting with US Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking. The secretary said the Marib offensive continues despite tremendous humanitarian consequences. The oil-rich region is the last stronghold of the government in the north, and the rebels have been trying to seize it since February. Houthis have also rejected a recent Saudi proposal for ceasefire. Moving on now, the talks between Iran and the world powers to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal will resume today in Vienna. In a statement, the EU's political director Enrique Mora said the EU's possible return to the pact and its implementation will be discussed. Mora noted that although nothing has changed on paper, but a lot has changed informally. He said the US-Iran distrust and the extraordinary hostility from Arab countries and Israel against the pact are the major hurdles going forward. Meanwhile, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said the world has no choice but to agree with Iran and lift the sanctions. Now, in Afghanistan, at least 5 people have been killed by unidentified gunmen in eastern Nangarhar province. Local authorities say a former Taliban member also died in the incident. They said 3 others were wounded in the shooting. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack yet. Meanwhile, Kabul says at least 10 Taliban have been killed in a rocket attack in Maidan Vardak province. In a tweet, the Ministry of Interior said many others were wounded. Now, Israeli police have clashed with Palestinians a day after the removal of barriers outside Jerusalem's Damascus Gate. The occupying forces arrested several Palestinians who gathered at the East Jerusalem Plaza to celebrate the removal of the barricades. Meanwhile, the Human Rights Watch says Israel is committing apartheid and persecuting Palestinians. In a report, the international rights watchdog said Israel's actions amount to crimes against humanity. The watchdog called on the International Criminal Court to investigate the systematic discrimination against Palestinians. Now, the United States says it will seek cooperation with China even as it competes with Beijing. At a press briefing, State Department spokesperson Ned Price termed the U.S.-China bilateral relations multifaceted. Price said Washington needs to mobilize its resources and work with allies to compete with China on some fronts. However, he added cooperation with Beijing in areas such as climate and Iran nuclear issues remains open. This comes a day after China vowed to step up its support for Russia amid tightening Western sanctions. Now, South Korea has urged the North to implement inter-Korean agreements and to step up ahead of the talks. Unification Minister Lee In-young made the remarks at an event marking the 3rd anniversary of the historic 2018 summit. Lee said South Korea is willing to resume talks with the North anytime, anywhere, and on any issue. He reiterated that peace in the Korean peninsula can only be realized through dialogue and cooperation. The Unification Minister expressed hope that Pyongyang will come out for talks at an early date. Inter-Korean exchanges and peace talks have stalled since the failure of a summit between North and the US in 2019. Greek and Turkish Cypriots are set to meet in Geneva today in a UN-led summit to discuss unresolved ethnic issues. The 3-day summit is aimed at exploring the opportunity to restart a peace process 4 years after the collapse of talks to reunify Cyprus. The meeting will be attended by Greek, Turkish, British foreign ministers and Cypriot leaders from both Turkey and Greece. Cyprus President Nikos Anastasiades said that Greek Cypriots are ready to attend talks with determination and political will. Anastasiades added he hopes that Turkish side attends the talks with the same zeal because a divergence will be harmful to both sides. The talks follows prolonged tensions over gas reserves in the eastern Mediterranean that called for the need for settlement in Cyprus. More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, in Nigeria, kidnappers have killed 2 more students they had abducted from a university in northwest Kaduna State. Last Tuesday, unknown gunmen had kidnapped 20 students along with 3 non-academic staff. Local authorities said the security agencies have recovered the bodies of the 2 students. Earlier, they had found 3 bodies in a nearby village. During the assault, a member of the Greenfield University staff was also killed. This is the 5th known attack on a school or college to kidnap officials and students for ransom since December. But the Nigerian authorities have repeatedly vowed not to pay ransom to the bandits. Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdul Aziz has invited the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, to visit the kingdom. Riyadh and allies broke off ties with Doha in June 2017, but this year, in January, they agreed to re-establish relations with Qatar. The Emir's office said Sheikh Tamim received the invitation from Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan during a reception in Doha. Qatar's foreign ministry said the 2 sides discussed the Gulf unity. Qatar's state media said they discussed bilateral relations and ways to strengthen them in all spheres. It said they also exchanged views on regional and international development as well as on a number of issues of common interest. The United States and the European Union have rejected redrawing the Western Balkan borders. The idea was floated after an unofficial diplomatic note was circulated among EU officials. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said changing borders would only increase regional tensions. European Union Chief Spokesperson Eric Mamer said Brussels does not favor any geographical changes. The document proposed breaking up Bosnia and merging Kosovo with Albania. It also suggested incorporating parts of Bosnia into Serbia and Croatia to aid European integration. The diplomatic note has not been claimed by any country and could not be verified for authenticity. The United States and the UK have imposed sanctions on a member of Guatemala's Congress over alleged corruption. In a statement, the U.S. Treasury said it blacklisted Congress Felipe Alejos Lorenzana and a former Chief of Staff Gustavo Adolfo Alejos Cambara. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the curb support Guatemala's efforts to end corruption. In a statement, he said the move comes as part of Washington's commitment to supporting improvements in governance in Guatemala. The sanctions frees any U.S. assets of the blacklisted people and bars Americans from dealing with them. Meanwhile, Britain also imposed sanctions against Lorenzana, along with a Honduran congressman for facilitating bribes. Australia's Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pezzullo has been upbraided and told to tone it down over a hawkish Anzac Day letter. Pezzullo had said the global drums of war are beating and Australia must prepare for regional conflict. Talking to reporters, West Australian Premier Mark McGowan said that sort of language is in no one's interest. He said diplomacy should be conducted diplomatically by people in elected office and by public servants. Labour Party lawmakers Bill Shorten said Pezzullo's message had a pretty hyper-excited language. Pezzullo's message on Anzac Day comes weeks after Defence Forces had warned a war over Taiwan would be disastrous for the region. Moving on now, Venezuela says its armed forces have suffered casualties in fighting with irregular Colombian armed groups in the past 72 hours. Defense Minister Vladimir Petrino says clashes took place in the west of the border town of La Victoria. In a statement, Petrino said the Venezuelan forces killed and captured many fighters of the armed groups. He accused the groups of seeking to export their narco-paramilitary model to Venezuela to destabilize the country. However, the defense minister did not specify the number of casualties to either side. Thousands of Venezuelans have crossed the border into Colombia since fighting in the western state of Apure broke out in late March. Now in Crimea, blooming peach gardens alongside the southern coast have become an excellent backdrop for a costume ball. Let's find out in this report.
Although spring has been late this year and peach trees just began to bloom, they're as beautiful as ever. A costume ball is being held at the blooming peach gardens near Ternovka village in the Crimean Peninsula. Dozens of couples dance the waltz, square, mazurka, and other classic styles. Works by Johann Strauss, Pyotr Tchaikovsky, Wolfgang Mozart, and other famous classical composers were played for the participants. Organizers say they wanted to preserve the beauty of Crimean nature and ball dancing, which organically came in tune with each other through the event.
Now, Australian researchers are attempting to reverse the decline of elusive species of platypus. The semi-aquatic animal is increasingly under threat from extreme weather events.
It only takes a rustle and splash of an orange buoy floating on the Thorn River for these scientists to know they have found what they're looking for, the elusive platypus. Famed for its bill, webbed feet, and venomous spurs, the platypus is one of only 2 egg-laying mammals in the world. Many Australians have never seen one in the wild. The researchers captured the platypuses with nets, tranquilize them, and attach electronic tags. They take blood and urine samples, a biopsy for genetics, and cheek pouch and fur samples to gauge the platypus diet.
If we want to dive into the finer details of how the population is doing and tracking change over time, then we really need to try and catch the platypuses and have a close look first in terms of estimating the population size. You can't do that with the DNA. You have to go through the hard effort of catching and tagging and releasing and doing that over.
Researchers say rivers and creeks need to be protected and revegetated for a healthy population of the mammal, as a study last year found that platypus numbers have dropped as much as 30%. Their habitat has shrunk by more than a fifth in the last 30 years, but the scientists believe they can still save the animal.
With the platypus, we are, getting increasing evidence that they are declining, but I think we've got a really unique opportunity that if we intervene now, that we can really prevent those extinctions in the future, and hopefully the platypus will be around for many more generations.
Besides extreme weather, dams, land clearing and diversion of waterways have also affected the population. Cattle have destroyed riverbanks critical for platypus burrows, while invasive animals, fishing nets and plastic rubbish have also affected the species.
Now, European stocks are trading mixed as global markets prepare for the US Federal Reserve's two-day meeting. Italy's FTSE MIP has shed close to 0.5%. Meanwhile, London's FTSE and Pan-European Stock 600 and Frankfurt's DAX have also shed fractionally. However, the CAC 40 in Paris has edged up above the flat line. Earlier, most Asian stocks declined, with the exception of Hong Kong's Hang Seng. Now in football, Leicester City have moved closer to Champions League qualification after they came from behind to beat Crystal Palace 2-1. The win leaves the Foxes in third place on the Premier League table with 62 points, 5 behind Manchester United. Wilfried Zaha fired Palace ahead in the 12th minute, but Timothy Castaigne equalised for the Foxes in early second half. Leicester's wins came in the 80th minute when Kelechi smashed home to complete the turnaround at King Power Stadium. The goal came as Ilianko's 12th in the last 9 games. The Foxes are now 7 points clear of 4th placed West Ham, while Crystal Palace are 13th with 38 points. Now in the National Basketball Association, DeMar DeRozan and Dejounte Murray led the way for San Antonio Spurs as they edged Washington Wizards 146-143 in overtime. The win comes as third consecutive for the Spurs and snaps Washington's 8-game winning streak. DeRozan recorded 37 points for the Spurs, while Murray finished with 25 points and 17 rebounds. Washington's Bradley Beal topped the scoring chart with 45 points but failed to avert their defeat. Meanwhile, Phoenix Suns beat New York Knicks 118-110 to end their 9-game winning streak. Devin Booker scored a game-high 33 points for the Suns, followed by Michael Bridges adding 21. In other matches, Minnesota Timberwolves edged past Utah Jazz 105-104, while Denver Nuggets dominated Memphis Grizzlies 120-96. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. With the weather update, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.